Okay, this section covers chapter 2, section 3, which is going to cover subtracting integers. Section 1 and 2 from chapter 2 was all just about adding integers, when they had the same sign or when they had different signs. Now, these strictly are going to deal with problems that have a minus sign between them, which seems like the same thing that we talked about, but there's a lot of differences here. You definitely want to spend a little bit more time thinking about this and working on this because these are the ones that kind of throw people off. Um, so in part one, what I have in the notes here is I have this use the keep chain change method. All right. And in the directions, I say express each subtraction sentence as the difference of the numbers given and four. Okay. So we're going to kind of use four every time. Then rewrite each expression, or sorry, rewrite each subtraction sentence as an equivalent addition sentence. So in other words, we're going to change these from a subtraction problem, with a minus sign between them, to an addition problem without changing their meaning. We want them to still mean the same thing. We still don't we don't want to we can't just, like, for instance, right here, we just can't say, oh, all of a sudden that's plus. Well, now that's a different problem. That's 10 plus 4, not the same thing. So you can see in this example right here that we squeezed in a plus sign, and then we just made this a negative. So the thing you have to kind of keep in mind, and this is sometimes a revelation to some people, they don't really realize this, but subtraction, because of what it is, because of how it works, subtraction makes the number that it is next to the one that's to its right, not the 10, for instance, but the number that it's next to, it makes it negative. So when you really think about it, even, back in the early days, kindergarten, first grade, when you learned to subtract 2 minus 1, that was your first experience. When you really think about it, that's your first experience with negative numbers. Now, your teacher probably didn't talk about it that way, didn't say, well, one's a negative number and two's a positive number. We just thought of, you have two something, you take away one, what do you have, right? But yeah, that's, when you're in essence, that is a plain and simple negative problem. All right. So what I'm trying to get at here is that you just have to kind of understand that a subtraction makes the number that it is next to negative. Okay. Also, I'm saying the word negative a lot, but subtraction doesn't necessarily mean negative. So another way to think of subtraction is the opposite, or reversing, or the inverse, perhaps. There's a lot of different ways or synonyms that we can kind of think of subtraction as, because sometimes we think, oh, a minus sign makes things negative, which is kind of true, right? But does a minus sign does it make everything negative? Well, sometimes it makes it positive, right? Kind of depends on what it's next to. All right, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So here, let's go through some of these. So um, like right here, I'm gonna write this out. We've got 10 minus 4. We're gonna write it out as subtraction. We're gonna start that out. And then we're gonna change it to addition. So we're gonna write it as 10 plus negative 4. 10 plus negative 4. I know it's like, what's the point? Like, I know that 10 minus 4 is 6. I get it. But the exercise here is just for you to kind of get in the habit of changing a subtraction problem into an addition problem of a negative. Think of it as the addition of a negative. So 10 plus negative 4 is 6 as well, right? Oh, what did I just do? I just did the wrong problem. Let me try this again. Let me try this again. Pardon me. I did 10 for whatever reason. Let me try that. 2 minus 4. Probably wondering what I was doing. All right, and then think of this as 2 plus negative 4. I wrote 10. All right, and that's a different answer. I was like, why did I get the same answer? Well, I did the same problem as the one before. So 2 plus negative 4, that is going to be negative 2. Negative 2. You might look at this, someone, especially if negatives are something that confuse you, but you might look at 2 minus 4 and you might confuse that with being just 2. Like, think of that like, oh, it's just the same thing as 4 minus 2, and it's not. It's not the same thing as 4 minus 2. 2 minus 4 is a far different problem. You got to think of that as 2 plus negative 4. Okay, that's a much easier way to kind of imagine it. Okay, on this next one right here, I'm gonna do this right and do 4 minus 4, and then we're gonna rewrite it as addition, so it's 4 plus negative 4. Now, what that's called right there, that's an example of something called additive inverse. I don't know if that's coming up in the notes, I forget. But additive inverse means like when you add the opposite, what do you get? You get 0. It cancels out. All right, so there you have it. All right, so this one right here, this next one, we're going to do 16 minus 4. We're going to rewrite that as addition. So 16 plus negative 4. 16 plus negative 4. 16 plus negative 4 is 12. Okay. Next one here, we're going to do this as 1 minus 4. 1 minus 4. I think it's on these kind of problems right here, where doing this, changing it to addition, makes the most sense. So you got 1 minus 4. Rewrite that as 1 plus negative 4. See, it makes it very clear when you rewrite it this way. 1 plus negative 4 makes it clear that you have a negative number with a higher absolute value. Therefore, it's going to come out negative. And it's going to be negative 3. All right, this next one right here, we're going to do 100 minus 4, which I know, like, you're like, that's 96. I get it. But let's just kind of get in these into a groove here. So 100 plus negative 4 is 96. I just said that, you know. All right, and then we've got 23 minus 4. Rewrite that as addition. So 23 plus negative 4, which is 19, positive 19. All right. Moving on to this next part right here. Subtraction is the same thing as blank. All right, so, and this is what I kind of just talked about, but subtraction is the same thing as adding the negative. Or adding the opposite, you know, but adding the negative. So adding a negative is kind of what subtraction is all about. So same thing here. We're just going to think of this as 6 plus negative 5. 6 plus negative 5 is 1. 6 plus negative 5 is 1. Right here, we're going to rewrite this as 3 plus negative 8. Right? So you're, like I said before, this is where it makes the most sense. Then you can truly see, you can see the signs here. You can see like, oh, this is positive, this is negative, and the negative has a higher absolute value. And you know, there's a kind of a checklist you kind of have to go through mentally when you're solving these kind of problems. You have to think like, okay, first of all, am I adding them or am I subtracting them? You know, well, for these, we're subtracting. I know it seems kind of weird, like there's a plus sign there. Why aren't we adding? Well, we're subtracting because they have different signs, which is what we covered in the last section. All right. And then you have to think, okay, well, I subtract 8 minus 3, that's 5. And then you have to think about, well, what's the sign going to be? The sign's going to be negative because the negative number had the higher absolute value. Okay, so that's kind of how you want to think those through. You want to think them, now you kind of want to take your time. I know for some of you, these might be easier. Some of this might be like, you know, you just never ever understood and it's really hard for you, but it definitely takes practice. You want to work at it until you kind of get it and it comes more natural to you. All right. So now let's get into this. So a negative blank, whatever is in front of. So a negative, this sounds redundant, but a negative negates whatever it's in front of. Negates means like it cancels, right? It undoes whatever it is in front of. All right. If a negative is in front of a positive, all right, the positive will become negative, those are a ton of examples that I was showing you just before. All right. If the negative is in front of a negative, now this is something we have not yet talked about, but when a negative is in front of a negative, the negative will become a positive. The negative will become positive. So that's kind of how that is. Like if you negate something that is negative, if you're subtracting a negative, when you're subtracting a negative, that becomes a positive. That becomes a positive. Think about like taking away a bad habit. When you cancel or negate a bad habit, Well, if you have a bad habit, think of whatever bad habit you could possibly have. Let's say your bad habit is not exercising or something. Well, if you get rid of the bad habit of not working out, then the opposite of not working out is obviously you are working out. You're becoming more active. Okay. If you have a bad habit of not flossing, then it becomes a good habit of actively flossing, so it becomes a positive thing. That's how that works. So like right here, this is a prime example. We have a minus a negative. When you take away a -9, that becomes +9. So that really is 1 plus 9. 1 plus 9 is 10. Okay. Right here, these two negatives become a positive. They become a positive. So this is really -2 plus 5. Now this negative stayed negative. We didn't change that. That didn't change to a positive. These, however, did change to a positive because we took away a negative. When you take away a negative, think about like taking away a debt. You owe money. If you have a debt, that means you have a negative, you owe an amount of money to something or somebody, and if you take away debt, well, now that's a positive. You don't owe that money anymore. It's yours. It's now money that you can keep. You don't need to give it back. It's a positive. So we've got right here, -2 plus 5 is +3, all right? Because they have different signs. We're finding the difference, and the positive number had the higher absolute value of the two. Right here, and a lot of these examples are very similar. Right here, these two negatives make a positive. So you got -7 plus 7. -7 plus 7 is 0. That's it. All right, that's additive inverse right there. All right, let's rewrite this problem. So we've got -12. Now these two negatives right here, those become plus. So that becomes +2 plus 9. Right here, -12 plus 2. -12 plus 2 is -10. I'm going to drop down to +9. Well, that's a difference right there because one is negative and the other one's positive. And 10 minus 9, I know it doesn't show that, but that's really how you want to think of that. You want to think of this 10 minus 9, which is 1, and it's going to be -1 because the higher absolute value is -10. Okay. And then the last thing in this section is about evaluating. And, when you're evaluating, I can't remember if we did, but when you're evaluating something, you are substituting the variable. Okay. You're taking the variable, the letter, you're substituting the variable. All right. Only substitute for the variable. The sign is not substituted. So this is kind of important. So when you put in a value for x, you're only replacing x. You're not replacing the sign that's in front of it. Same thing for y. We're only replacing the value for y, not the sign that's in front of it. So you want to keep those signs the way they are. You're only replacing the x. You're only replacing the y. All right, so I'm going to rewrite this like this. I'm going to write -30 minus, and I'm going to put parentheses here in place of x, and I'm going to put it in place of y. Okay, and I'm going to put in, well, x is 5 and y is -2 right there. All right, and so let's do all the things that we've learned, which is, like right here, we're going to change subtraction into addition. So let's do that. So we're going to rewrite that as -30 plus -5. So we're going to join that negative with the 5. Okay, and then we're going to take this right here. We have two negatives. That makes a positive. So that becomes +2 right there. So -30 plus -5. -30 plus -5, that is -35. Okay, got -35. Drop down the 2. Now right there, you have different signs. So you're going to subtract those because one's positive, one's negative, and the negatives win. So it's going to come out to be -33. -33 for that one. All right, do the same thing here. I'm going to put in place of the x. Remember, all I'm going to do is replace the x and replace the y, not the sign, especially right here. I'm not going to replace that sign that's in front of that y. I'm only replacing the y. Okay, so I'm going to put parentheses minus 5 minus whatever y is. And then we're going to put those values in there. So x this time is -8 and y is -1. Okay, and let's clean it up. So remember, if we have subtraction, let's change it to addition. Let's change it to addition of a negative. See, that's how you want to think of it. So -8 plus -5. All right, right here you have minus a negative. When you subtract a negative, it becomes a positive. All right, so there you have it. Now we're ready to do our math. So -8 plus -5, that makes -13. Got -13 plus 1. And it's -13 because they both have the same sign, right? When they have the same sign, you add the absolute values. I know I'm repeating myself a lot, when I'm doing these, but it just needs to be said. You kind of need to hear yourself also saying those things. Like as you're doing it, you're actively thinking about what are the signs? What am I doing to these numbers? Am I adding them? Am I subtracting them? And then lastly, you're thinking, well, how's it going to come out? Does it come out positive? Does it come out negative? Okay, that's how you want to think of it. All right, so you have -13 plus 1, which is -12. All righty. All right, this last one is just a application problem here, word problem. It says right here, eruptions have caused the following volcano to grow. All right, so in 1995, the summit elevation was minus or -235 meters. In 2020, the elevation was -182 meters. All right, so which doesn't seem like growing, right? Doesn't like how does that grow? Well, how did it become a smaller number? Well, actually, when you think of it, that's a bigger number, right? That's, if I write this as a inequality, -235, right, is less than -182, right? -235 is further underwater than -182 meters. All right, so find the difference in elevation between the two dates. All right, so we're going to find the difference of elevation. So now difference is one of those keywords that tells us subtract, right? Which means use a minus sign. So you're going to, let's do this like, we're going to do -235, right? Minus -182, like that. All right, and do like this. And you know what? Let me do it this way. Actually, it doesn't matter. All right, so these two negatives right here, they make a positive. So I'm going to rewrite it. So -235 plus 182. And then you're going to subtract those because they have different signs. So I'm going to do 235 minus 182. All right, and that's going to be what? That's going to be 53. All right, and that's going to be -53. All right, that does it.